Okay. Excellent. All right. Hello, everyone. We may be the most people we've had at an audit committee in a while. Yeah. Everyone's learning that audit committee is really the place to be on your Thursday evening.
Yeah,
Very warm. But in here it's quite cool. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm Maureen. This is Susan. We're your audit committee co-chairs. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Does everyone have a copy of the agenda? I will go ahead and pass them around if people don't have them. Let's see, do we need to make the switch in the agenda verbally? Or? Yeah. Do we have some folks from DES, as you can see, who are joining us today? On the original agenda, we had a number of things, including the draft audit work plan and whatnot ahead of them. And so after we do our approval of minutes and co-chair's report, we're going to just move directly to the completed audit work so that they can get their portion completed before we discuss more audit committee only things, and we'll give them back some of their time. So I think that is the only change to the agenda from what was originally sent. And with that, I think we will move to the minutes.
I left early last time, remember? Family emergency. You guys are on your own.
Excellent. And Bill's not here to give us his edit, so
Should we wait? Stop them. We barely had a.
we were pretty close on form, but I mean, I don't know that anyone else is gonna.
Contradiction.
Yeah, I read through them. I felt like it was accurate.
I did ask DHS to take a look. Since they spoke and they were good.
Okay,
they were good.
Okay,
okay.
That's good.
We
were here.
All right, excellent. I would move adoption of the minutes for March 26, 2025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have to abstain.
And one abstention. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if you don't mind, if I could just jump in on just a couple of things with regards to the minutes. So as you can see that the minutes that the committee has approved, they're quite lengthy minutes. They're almost a transcript of our meeting. What we're doing going forward, and including this past meeting, is that we're now recording the meeting and we're posting the video of the meeting. So going forward, what we will be doing is have our minutes will be more summarized, since there is a video that will show these. Part of the rationale for that is to get to these approved minutes. It's quite a lift in resources and time. Like these minutes, as you see here, took in excess a little over 20 hours to get this ready. In the past, I mean, the January meeting, I think, took about a good 30, 35 hours. So I think it'll be a little bit more, having the abridged or summarized set of minutes will be more useful, along with having the video. If someone wanted to watch the full committee meeting, they can do so.
Well, I will just say that I'm already nostalgic for the high quality of these minutes and thoroughness.
And it'll be uploaded on the county YouTube, I believe, which I do believe produces a transcript if you are so inclined to still read from the YouTube transcript.
One other point of reference. Also, I mean, John, with your questions in regards, there was some questions that you had regarding the housing grants audit that was finalized. So what we thought in response to the questions that you had, that we're gonna, at the September meeting, we're gonna invite the DHS team. Because a number of those, the responses would be better answered by the DHS team. So we're gonna invite them back in September, as well as they'll talk about the nonprofit funding.
Okay, terrific. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. All right, I think that is all on our minutes. Moving to item 3, co-chair's report. I don't have a report.
Just that we're really excited to have auditing team in full throttle. And really, we talked about last time, grateful that the first official deliverable was really well received. I know this one's a little harder and we have harder conversations today, but just the spirit with which you guys are working and the spirit with which the broader organization is working with you is really promising, because I think this is exactly how it's supposed to work, which is, everyone's busy day to day and we can always get better and we have to look at things in order to get better. So
Really like our auditors. They're great. Doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Wayne made me a birthday cake.
have a new audit item.
Yeah.
Audit the auditors,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, excellent. We will move forward then. All right, are we doing the draft before, or are we doing DES before the draft?
Yes, we'll do,
Okay,
go
right.
through the reports here.
all right, so we are passing it over to our auditor and staff.
Thank you very much. So actually, there are 3 total reports that we're going to discuss today. The first will be the specialized transit Arlington for Arlington residents STAR. We'll go through that performance audit first, and then we have 2 follow-up audits that we will and talk about the status of the corrective action. So moving on to STAR. So what we'll do is I'll go through the various slides that have been prepared here and walk you through what the audit objective was, go through the scope and testing areas, conclusions, and then go through the various findings at a very high level. And then from there, I will turn it over to DES to get into the opening remarks and what comments they would like to make in relation to the audit findings. And from there, then we'll open up the floor for some Q&A, because I'm sure so John, we have your questions and we have prepared so we can go through the questions that you have listed. So in regards to just an overview of the audit, starting with the objective, the objective was really to assess the Transit Bureau's effectiveness in managing the STAR program efficiently and ensuring that the operational performance of the service providers, that they were performing their jobs consistent with the contract, working efficiently and effectively. Our scope was within fiscal year 2025. Most of our more detailed testing was felt between the months of November 2024 through February of 2025. There was some other little bit of testing here and there, just kind of on the outside of that, but most of the testing that rendered into reaching our observations and conclusions fell within November of 24 to February of 25. We had 5 different areas that we tested. First and foremost, taking a look at the completeness and accuracy of billing from our service providers, namely the service providers providing the transportation, and taking a look at their operational data for completeness and accuracy. Adherence to some customer service standards within the STAR program, and how the STAR program, and from an ease of use and the individuals that are using the STAR program, that they are able to their reservations, get the rides, and take a look at how into the enrollment process. We also did some work around the system application supporting STAR. So STAR on the web, some of the back office applications, such as one which is called Trapeze, which is the system that was providing the operational support to the program. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the systems later on. And then also with the Transit Bureau and just their oversight of DriveView. So DriveView is also known as Diamond Transportation. There was another service provider there, Red Top. So they were, from the time that we did the audit, there was a period of where the contract shifted from in November of 2024 was the old contract model. And then December 2024 started the new contract model where it was just DriveView and Transdev providing the customer support. And then lastly, in terms of test areas with the operational effectiveness. A lot of that. I can put that, but so hitting on to the conclusion of the audit. So while the program is providing the, what it's providing the intended services that it's there for, the audit did identify, go into the greater detail here in a minute, but we did identify some of the deficiencies with operational oversight and more around the data quality. And the data quality was in looking at the data that was provided from an operational aspect provided by We Drive You. The data we concluded was incomplete, unreliable, and it was inconsistent for us, and it made it very difficult. I mean, not only during, we noted errors during the audit, but for the oversight to management by the Transit Bureau, it's a challenge for them to reconcile. It wasn't complete data to help them even reconcile operational statistics or also the invoice piece. As of right now, I want to say that the audit follow-up is scheduled for Q1 of 2027. And what really fiscal year 2027. And what really drives that is the corrective action plan. So if there's corrective action plans that will, if right now, as their corrective action plan schedule calls for something to be done, I'm going to just pull this off the top of my head. So it may be a little different than what's actually in the report. But for example, if the Transit Bureau says, oh, we're going to have everything done by Q3 of 2026 or Q4 of 2026, we don't want to schedule the follow-up directly like the next day. We want to allow time for transactions so that we're coming in to verify that we're looking at transactions under the new procedures, under the new process that is in place. So when we're rendering a conclusion, the findings have been satisfactorily resolved. We're looking at data that matches up against that. Lastly, in the report, you'll see that there are some places where the Transit Bureau indicated that some of the corrective actions will require some contract modifications and some, taking a look at, kind of the cost benefit of things would look going forward. I totally agree with their statement there. The comment that is in the report from the Office of County Auditor, AuC, is to say, yeah, we agree with what you have to do. However, if there is a recommendation or something that needs modification or change, or you cannot do, because we understand that there's a cost benefit to some of this. So we don't want to drive costs up for the county because you got to make the auditors happy. But if there's something that they can't do, we support the idea that if they just maintain the documentation to give the analysis of why, so that when we come back and do the follow-up, we're able to see that, and that will give us some and I know Greg and his team will give a response, but overall there was agreement to the findings that were noted in the audit and agreement to the recommendations and implementing the recommendations. And I just talked about this other point here about the contract modifications. But I will say that the team and working with the Transit Bureau team, it was a real pleasure in working with the team. Really, there was really displayed a level of commitment to wanting to improve. And there were a number of times that we were discussing our observations and showing how we arrived at that observation. The team was like, hold it, I like how you put that together. Can you share that with us so we can use it going forward? So we did supply, kind of walking through the audit gift shop. We gave some deliverables, some presents to them to help them.
You have to go through on the way out. Right?
What's that?
You have to go through.
Yeah, you have to go through the gift shop on the way out. So, but no, we really appreciated their level of interest in wanting to make the improvement. So that was excellent. The other item here noted here to the last dash and bullet point about corrective actions are underway. I really applaud the team for implementing this new trip booking and management tool, Spare. we'll all get into this here in a second, but what you'll see is that a common cause to some of these issues were the different levels of platform that, whether it's the call center, the transportation provider we drive you, I mean, everyone was on different platforms. So when that really complicated with making last minute changes or the impact to our customers using particular service. Another thing I'll say on here too that is not in the conclusion section that I'll add, I did some testing around who was using the service. So tested people who was actually using it, tested a couple hundred people, and they were all authorized. So there was no issue. I'm sure the transit bureau folks are like holding on tight, but there was no issue of seeing someone using the service that was not authorized to use the service. So
That was not what to use, sir.
what's that?
What was the last thing you said?
Oh, that they were authorized to use.
Oh, okay. I see.
So there was no one using the service who was not labeled with a disability.
No abuse of the county services for people who are not qualified to use those services.
So we'll move forward and go a little bit deeper into the findings. Oh, yeah, go ahead. She's got my notes, so let's see.
Yeah.
So, so the first finding here is around just the performance metrics did not provide assurance that starts meeting the program goals. So this is looking at 4 different areas. One being safety, which is very important in any type of transportation or anything in life that you're providing. So providing, so we'll take a look at the safety piece. Also looking at the data around reliable service, and there were some data quality management issues with that. And one of the items there one of the 2 items dealt with excessive ride time. And when we tested, because the contract says if there are individuals in the vehicle for us more than 2 hours, that there is a kind of a credit that we get to the invoice. So there was a data issue there because when we tested the data, we had exceptions, and then we were later advised that the data that was provided from WeDriveU was inaccurate and had errors, which goes to this was towards the end of the audit. So that's what really, that was at the point where it was like, okay, we really do have some of these data issue quality issues that need to be improved. Also, the checklists to assess ADA compliance for more of the vehicles. So that was, there was no checklist for that, as well as some of the customer assistance practices and for ADA piece. And then lastly, with customer feedback and invoice deductions were not being used to address performance issues. So this is, one of the things of we're getting data in terms of what customers are saying or what we're seeing, but using that data to help drive better success in the program. And we one of the things that we talked about is no-shows. So how can we use the data in regards to no-shows to drive better performance? The no-show piece, a contributing factor to that was back to using different platforms. So now that we're on Spare, that should really contribute to a better experience for the customers. And for example, if a customer was trying to link up or find their driver, it would require a phone call to the call center. Then the call center would have to call WeDriveU. WeDriveU has to go into another tool. It was a lot of phone calls, but because the call center did not have the ability to see exactly where the car was located. So now that they have this tool, they can get more real time. So the call center can say, hey, well, it's just around the corner. The driver will be there soon. Went to the wrong door, whatever, but we'll help be able to link up the individuals. So the recommendations here are really around addressing that particular, in each of those areas, one about establishing a formula for preventable crashes, because that was one of the first things around safety, is not having a metric to assess program safety. So now establishing, monitoring and tracking of that. We Drive You, We Drive You does have a safety and an accident committee, and we just saw evidence of them meeting and talking, but now we just need to make sure that we're monitoring the safety components. Just, again, I just, can't really stress enough about the kind of using the multiple platforms here. But again, that's is being addressed. And again, management has taken actions to address this particular area. And I know, Shirley, you did quite a lot of work in this area as well. I don't know.
No, I mean, I would say that what we were trying to do is, as Mike said, identify the key goals for the program and see what the framework looked like for determining whether or not it's supposed to be met. Right? The contracts had metrics built in around most of them, and also some additional standards for deductions if the goals weren't being met, that kind of thing. And I think what we found was, it's good framework, it's a good start, but they just need to have some improvements and a little bit more attention being paid to make sure those metrics are delivering the information that we want to know about the program.
We'll go to the second finding. So the second finding is involving the amounts that were billed for services were not consistent with the contract terms. And so, as I was saying earlier, with the STAR program, we came in at the time of for the audit for this sample period. We did want to take a look at kind of both timeframes. So the former, under the old contract model, and this is the finding that led to this, under the former contract model, there was the method for billing was around billed revenue. So there was a billed revenue calculation methodology that was used that was not stated in the contract. And there were such as billing at a minimum of 8 hours, kind of rounding this piece up. And the contract did not. So we did go back and take a look and back into prior periods. And you can see here for September through November, what were the identified amounts we had. So for this billed revenue hour piece. And then the other part that came up for this was that the contract required that there be an adjustment for deadhead hours. So when a vehicle is not transporting someone, if you're going to, those hours of not transporting should be removed from it. So if a car was out for 8 hours and at 1 hour that was deadhead, but those deadhead hours should be backed out. The other part in the calculation here is, so looking at the December timeframe, so the model for billing adjusted at that time to per ride. So the county was billed an amount per ride. And when We Drive You invoice for the December timeframe, they overstated, they picked up the wrong unit number, and some other testing that was done, but there was a note. We noticed that there were roughly 487 trips. Most of that was the 398 was the wrong number that they had picked up, but then there was another piece of were billed for trips that were not performed or canceled. We got billed for those as well. So that's what got to the 32,000. As soon as we noticed that was identified, we immediately got to the Transit Bureau, and the Transit Bureau was like, okay, we have not paid this invoice yet. So they put the brakes on it. So that invoice, they talked to We Drive You, and We Drive You had to cancel that invoice and regenerate and send us a new one. So fortunately, we were able to stop the 32,000 from going to the door. So that occurred. In terms of course, the recommendation is to address this, kind of that billed revenue piece. And I did consult with the county attorney about how far do we go back for the calculation for a recovery. So going back, and because our contract with We Drive You stated that they are to keep their records for 5 years. So in consultation with the county attorney, I said, well, the recommendation I want to make is to go for the full 5 years. And Greg and his team has since done the analysis to calculate what was that overbill. 5 years. I think it came up to about a little over $100,000. 108. And so they could talk to that, but they agreed with going back for that time frame with again, there was agreement to this finding, as well as implementing some ways to, and this is where we shared with some ways how they can look for these things from doing data analysis going forward, so they can better, kind of watch this going forward and being able to do some of the inputs or,
Wayne, I don't know how you want to handle questions today, but while we're on this topic, so $108,000 that you believe was inappropriately paid to the vendor. There's something in the report that says I think you've already made, you're already going after it. What's their response? Are they throwing up their hands? Are they saying the check's in the mail?
We don't
What are
have
they
a
saying?
response yet. And I think the contract, they got like 30 days to respond. And so
They have what?
They have 30 days to respond. So we're still on that window. So I think they're trying to figure it out. If they told you anything else, Clint.
Right now they're checking with their legal team to figure out how they can go about it.
Okay, and how long, imagine the lawyers involved. So speaking of lawyers, so you're consulting with our county attorney and determining what next steps might be, or is that
It was made
maybe
mention-
premature or what?
We talked to the county attorney, we kind of collaborated on this and our approach, and we've sent the letter. We'll see how they respond.
Okay, and how far back does this contract go with WeDrive?
I don't know. How long was it?
Yeah, but
This was on November 30th. That was the end of the 5th year of 5-year options, but the original contract was from 2014.
Okay, so you're going back all the way to 2014 then to see?
The contract was that old.
Okay.
We only
Five
had
plus
5 years based on the contract.
Oh, okay, so the 108,000 would capture anything in the last 5 years.
Correct.
So before that, it's gone, right? We're not doing anything about that.
Yes, the audit didn't go into 2019 or FY19.
Okay, and then what about for Red Top?
So Red Top, their model for billing was different. They were billing on actual trips. So they didn't have a billed revenue hour calculation.
Okay,
And I did, there was test work done on their contract, and there were no issues or anything identified with the Red Top. Because they
So
were
we-
billing the per trip.
so WeDrive is continuing, and Red Top, which didn't have any blemishes apparently, was let go, or they withdrew voluntarily. The contract ended, right, in December of 2024.
Their
What,
contract ended November 30th.
why was that?
Because we were at the end of your 10-year contract, we recompeted it. We went through a competitive process and a scoring process. The Red Top was not selected. That the short story? The short story.
So they weren't selected even though they actually had a better record than WeDrive. At least on this metric, right? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
The Red Top serve 4, only have 1 now.
Yes, just one provider now.
The Red Top service and the old WeDrive, which called Diamond, they have always been supplementing each other because the Red Top is a taxi company that operates a different type of vehicle fleet. And WeDrive, you actually have the larger vehicles that are like, the larger white van. So when we went out and seek contract, we sought for one contractor. And Red Top just basically did not provide a competitive proposal that would win them.
Way, right?
Yes.
I remember you from the flashing beacon on Carlin Springs Road.
Wow.
Good to be noted.
I'm continue doing it.
yeah.
You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
So you're not thinking you would need a supplemental I mean, it sounds like you had two before, but Red Top was just a supplemental when,
Well, currently,
As we get into this, I might just take a brief moment, we started the process. So I'm Greg Manuel, for my, and, I'll have some comments for you later, as Wayne indicated, I'll give you some comments, but since we're getting to questions, I'm here supported by Wei Wong, Transportation Division Director. Pierre Holloman, unfortunately, who's the Transit Bureau Chief, is taking his daughter to college orientation, so he can't join us. But we're
But I
capable.
thought yesterday, thrilled.
Greg, you started asking that.
This would have been easier.
Yeah, right.
But Clinton Edwards oversees both the big art operational contract and all its changes that's going on, and the STAR contract, along with Rocco Visconti and the Transit. Rocco's been with us. We started as an intern, and we recently hired him. On the financial side, I'm supported by Tyler Smith, who's kind of our great guru of all things financial when we get to the details there. And online, I think we also have Krista, who's overseeing a lot of the audit stuff. She supports us. So back to your specific question. Let's get back to it. You want to take that one?
yes, so We Drive You has dedicated vehicles, but there are supplemental services through a contract called USERV, which they employ Uber and Lyft to provide the same sort of supplemental service that Red Top did.
so it's all under one contract.
It's all under one.
now.
Yes. Yes,
And the lead on that contract is not you all anymore, but We Drive You.
yes, We Drive You, and you serve as a sub to We Drive.
Okay, so, so one of the things, mentioned, we did some testing around Red Top, but if we were to go back to Red Top or that type of a situation or a model, one of the things that we shared too, I mean, there were no findings, but some things to think about, like if we were to enter into a contract with them, and there were still some things that I was like, yeah, like if there were situations where the contract allowed, if there were two people in a vehicle that going to the same place, the rate that we would pay would still be somewhat, high. I was like, so if there's going to be a second person in that vehicle, could it be at a lower? So there were some suggestions. I mean, I wouldn't say that Red Top is, in my opinion, and this is just speaking off the cuff, I mean, not perfect, but relative to, I didn't find any errors with it. I'll say that. The next.
Can I ask one question on that before we move on? Is when the decision to combine those two services was made at the procurement level, was there any risk analysis that might reduce the number of those responding? Am I tracking that right? You did one procurement for the two.
Yes, we did one procurement, and no, we did a risk analysis, but because of the proposals and reviewing them, the number of vehicles that were available between We Drive You and their sub-user, we felt like the service area could be preserved, especially with We Drive You being an existing provider. So
Got it.
previously they were known as Diamond Transportation, and so they understood the Arlington service model. So that's why we were very comfortable moving forward with them, with USERV as their
Did we
supplement.
get more than one bid for that combined? Red Top did.
Yes, we received 6 total vehicles.
No, please continue.
So this next finding here was on just kind of looking at their daily trip manifest and reconciling and testing those. So what this test involved was just comparing for November and December, going into the details of looking at actual trip manifest and reconciling and comparing that was documented on that trip manifest match to what was reported in our service hours report. And you can see for November had a 53% error rate, December had an 84% error rate. And this is saying that, kind of what was reported on that manifest differed from the data that we were given. So back to the data quality piece that was raised. But the thing here is that when you're looking at that manifest and reconciling and balancing out the revenue collection of this, there were not consistent verification. So when the drivers return to the yard, at the end of the day, bringing in their records, there was not ample inspection and verification of what the drivers were reporting on their manifest in terms of coupons they had collected. So there were a number of errors there. And that's kind of where that's where the error rates came. So
I mean, I realize that this could be attributed to a lot of different things, but would it be your speculation or considered judgment that this has primarily to do with a lack of training of the drivers and the vendor, or is it, you think, willful disregard for what they're supposed to do, or what? I mean, like, how does this happen time after time when there's a disconnect between the manifest and what happened on the ground?
And just to add to your question, how did you take into account the underperformance when you looked at the bids?
As far as underperformance is concerned, we had a scoring.
Drive you seems like.
Yeah, so we had a scoring rubric that was done for each of the 6 bidders. So we looked at what they provided us. We set up interviews with some of the finalists. And so based on the rubric that we had, that's how we were able to score through our selection advisory technical.
So their underperformance was taken into account when you compared bids.
I'm sorry, the bid process happened in the fall of 2024. This audit didn't start until December.
Okay.
So this audit started in we awarded the contract on December 1st, 2024, and then the audit.
So there was no calculation at the time of the bidding.
Yes,
About their
yes. I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Sure. So my question was really, I mean, do we think that is the fundamental problem here a lack of training by DriveU with respect to their employees, or is it willful disregard for what they're supposed to do? Is it, is it lack of fundamental education where people are not really qualified for the position, or what?
I think it's really more so refreshing the processes. So when the bus driver comes in for the day, when they turn in the cash and the coupons, actually having a dispatcher to sign off on it. So someone there to count the cash and coupons, put a physical signature on it to make sure that when they enter it and turn it over to the Transit Bureau, that those numbers match up. So it's really about strengthening those processes and putting those controls in place to make sure that the monies that are being turned in on a daily basis actually match what they put in the monthly report to us.
I mean, do we think they're being trained properly?
Absolutely. When we first brought this to them in January of 2025, Wayne and Shirley showed us a revenue variance report that we could do, and we immediately saw a difference that we wanted to have a threshold above 3% where it would be concerning to us. And immediately from the December report to January, February, that number was within a variance that we were comfortable with, just as far as cash received versus just us taking a percentage of each number of trips provided in each zone 1, 2, and 3, and estimating based on the fare, how much fare we should get in, and comparing that to what actually came in. That number has come down and is within a threshold that we now look at on a monthly basis as part of our checklist and our revised invoicing review procedure.
And that was the first thing that they requested. It was like, oh, can I get it? Can I get a copy of how you did that? And so that was very helpful because, as Clinton said, when you would look at December, there was just kind of doing the quick analysis, you could see a variance of 10%. You were like, oh, that looks like it doesn't look right. So, I mean, needless to say, this analysis was done post the December work. So when we did December, actually through April, I think it was April, but was it, or maybe March, that was down to 0.5%. So it got really low. So that analysis, the other thing that we share too is that using your this revenue analysis, so that was what management has implemented there, was that doing this monthly analysis, but doing that analysis has really, it really puts a spotlight on to say if your error rate, so they have a threshold. So if their threshold, however they want to judge it, they could go back and say, okay, I want to see the if the error rate is high, they could go back and say, I want to see the manifest and I want to start digging a little bit deeper, but you could use that threshold to help guide how much other QA work you want to do. Error rate, select more. Below your threshold, you could select less. So that's what the monthly spot inspections is getting to. So it's a detective control to say whether or not you get it. I think covered a lot on that, and I think we're going to go to the last finding here, and this was the operational inefficiencies around using this is more the technology piece. So looking at there were the two issues here. One was using under the old thing. This is before Spare got implemented, but there was a module within their customer tracking or customer, like when there's trip changes that they were not fully using, that could help minimize some of the back and forth and how to minimize trip changes, last minute trip changes. And then Star on the web had allowed customers to schedule trips that were not consistent with the program, how the program is set up. I will say on that piece, even though the customer could book the trip would then go to the call center. The call center would then say, oh, wait a minute, that trip is out of the parameters of what you can do. So the call center will go back and did go back to say, yeah, you can't do that. You're going to have to find out the transportation. But what that does is just creates a bad experience for the customer, because here they think they have a ride and then they later find out they don't have a ride. So, and the error message that came back on those wasn't very helpful. Like, saying, oh, this is, because it was, I had a test account where I would go in and I try to go from, I believe, DC to, and it wouldn't allow me to do it, but it didn't come back with an error message that would tell me. So, but doing it. But the Spare tool here, the recommendation was rather improving this, but the Spare tool that they've implemented will do a much better job than what they had before this. So this was the last finding that wanted to go through. I know we've already had some questions, but again, in all my years of auditing, I just didn't start auditing 5 years ago. I had a lot more there too, but the team was really awesome, and I commend them and applaud them for their level of commitment of wanting to learn, like, how do we get better at this? And I know Clinton will call, Rocco will call, San or Way will call and say, hey, how you were thinking about this. So even with the Spare tool, even though that was out of scope for us to take a look at, they did reach out to us to say, hey, can you and Shirley sit in on a meeting? We want to kind of show you how this works and any feedback. So, when you provide that to an auditor, auditors are very happy. So when people reach out. So, but I thank Greg and his team for their hard work through the audit.
Yeah, I have a question about the scheduling tool, because if I heard you right, Uber and Lyft are supplemental. How does this tool interface with their tools? Do you have access to their data? Because it seems like it might be proprietary.
Yeah, so what Spare does is that when a user books a trip now, it instantly puts them on the vehicle. So based on their profile, it'll either assign them on a U-Serve trip or it'll assign them on a WeDrive. So the only difference is the vehicle types. The proprietary information is taken care of directly to the Spare app through their partnership. And so they book the trip either on their own or through the call center, and it puts them directly on the thing.
And you don't have any problem with like the supplementals that really match up with the metrics that you're using?
Yes, so UServe provides all of the data directly into Spare, and then Spare provides that data directly to WeDrive. So through the Spare app, we can see all of the trips that are scheduled for the day, any adjustments. That proprietary information is outside of Cambridge County. WeDrive Spare.
I don't know. I'm trying to read if there's any overall.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I'll take you covered a lot of it already, but I'll try to hit a couple other points. We greatly value the relationship with Wayne and Shirley and how they approach it. We learned a lot, and the iterative and communicative way that we went about was really appreciated. So we're in the process, as Wayne briefed, making these changes to improve our oversight, compliance, and service quality. I did want to take a little bit to kind of properly frame the business landscape and context for the contract changes that we're about to go approach. And Wayne noted that earlier. So if you look across the kind of the spectrum of time and the 10-year-old contract, the landscape has dramatically changed because once where we had many active and successful taxi companies that could compete and provide service using accessible vans, right? You know, the whole thing with the rideshare apps and Uber and Lyft have really changed the number and type of potential bidders and the entire kind of driver labor force. It's dramatically different compared to what used to be. So despite that market shift, we still need to provide the paratransit service. And in fact, to meet the service, as you know, the model relies on Uber and Lyft to fill the gap when needed, just because it's challenging to keep enough people hired and employed and trained and have them, you know, we can't pay them to sit around. We wouldn't want to pay that much. So given that kind of limited market, how we continue to provide the service and make these desired contract changes at the same time, it's kind of an art form of negotiations we go into the contracts. So we can't make demands and not compensate, of course, and we can't quickly switch to somebody else. So we don't want to disadvantage our position in this kind of public forum, but the market is such that we really need to value and understand our relationship with our service provider. We've got to partner with them to determine how best to meet that intent of the audit findings. I appreciate your comment, Wayne, about kind of like figuring out what's going to be a value and what's going to be affordable in operation. The audit highlighted pretty serious operational gaps and areas for improvement, and we're committed to implementing those recommendations as we go about doing the contract modifications for those two different vendors, both WeDriveU and Transit. This will take some time. I hope that they will have an open mind and accept our proposed changes, and then we'll make those cost and value decisions. Mr. Weistat raised a number of great questions that are really kind of more policy and service delivery questions and even staffing level related. Those will all be resolved today, but they will certainly feed into our upcoming budget process. And as our county manager presents next year's beautiful mosaic of a budget,
I mean, one big beautiful budget.
One big balance.
Legally required.
At that time, you might be able to look very closely in that mosaic and see an artful change or two that still meets the requirements that we have to provide and it fits within that kind of complicated array of services and priorities across the county. So, you know, John had asked the questions about the zones. And so as we do that, you know, those changes may or may not include a relook at the zones we serve. And for those, you know, I don't know if this is, you know, because this is being recorded, I'll say this for these people who are going to listen if they're not familiar with the basic service. This is really complementary priority transit service for residents with disabilities. Because, you know, we in Arlington tend to provide a high level of service in everything we do. We tend to overachieve. The STAR service currently exceeds the federal requirements in terms of service coverage area. You know, we only have to provide for our 26 square miles, but in fact, our service provides the same geographic coverage as the regional paratransit provider, Metro Access, all 1,500 square miles. So, you know, everything, Alexandria, Falls Church, Fairfax City and Fairfax County, Loudoun District, Montgomery and PG counties, 1,500 square miles. So, and the kind of logical question is, well, how do those interact with each other? The latest information I got from Clinton was that STAR currently provides an average of 128 daily trips for our residents, and Metro Access provides an average of 28. So we were providing about 4.5 times as many trips per day, which suggests that our residents, despite these challenges, like our service better when they have a choice. So we have to kind of weigh that in, and any changes to that dynamic would predictably involve, and we'd likely get some strong voices from our community and those committees and commissions, particularly those representing our citizens that have that limited. So that's just context for the budget process. Another thing which one of John's questions kind of hit on was my responsibilities in properly resourcing my team for the work I asked them to do. And I'll give you a little contrast. And that, of course, that also happens in the budget process. So here I've got Clinton is doing STAR, was one of the many things he does, along with Rocco, who does many other things as well. I think the way we put it down in the audit was about 1.25 FTEs, which I think is probably generous. It's probably lower than that. I think if I had to amend the audit weight, I'd probably say it's less than any FTE that we've got to. So we do a lot with a very lean team. By contrast, Metro Access, I don't have their number of riders for that same 1,500 square miles. WMATA has 39 FTEs managing that same regional coverage. So that's kind of a lengthy preamble. The context setting, I would simply say that we are embracing these challenges and findings of the audits, leading in, working with Wayne and Shirley to address them and do it in the most responsible, creative way we can. Everything from the new billing and trip verification protocols to timely follow-up with the overcharges to the, I think when we originally talked about it, we weren't sure how quickly we get the Spare app implemented, but we've got it implemented already, which is a great credit to Pierre and Clinton, Rocco team to get it done. And we've already replaced Star on the Web with a new site that adheres to the program requirements where we had those deficiencies that the auditor found. And we have drafted the criteria and definition for the preventable crashes, the ADA checklist, and the customer assistance practices. So we're very committed to this, to take the right corrective actions. But in the context of a long-term operational and financial sustainability and reliability of the STAR service, which may require investments in related policy decisions, staffing, the technology, the service area, and the standards planning, and of course, those contract modifications. So as we go about all of those, I would simply say this. While we're doing that, we have to keep our customers and the operational services a priority. It is those who have those special transportation needs that demand our respect, our professionalism, empathy, and our very best thinking as we uphold that commitment to their mobility and their independence. So that's just our mindset as we go. But I appreciate the opportunity to have an introductory comment, and let's continue the discussion, assisted by my very capable team.
Lauren, go ahead.
I have a question about the break even for this, because it sounds like we're duplicating. I mean, I know you may have customer, but it didn't sound like there's been a customer satisfaction survey between the two that does a direct comparison. It doesn't sound like we're doing any advertising within our services to let people know that Metro Access is available. So maybe people don't even know that it exists. And conversely, maybe people with Metro Access aren't aware of the STAR program. And I don't know the population, so I don't know their awareness, but it doesn't sound like, it hasn't been presented that we have that information available. So I'm curious about duplication, but even assuming, let's say that we said, well, hand out flyers about Metro Access. There may be a lower or greater cost effectiveness for that service, given the extensiveness of where Metro and ARC go. I still have a question about, because this should have come up in the bidding, is their break evens. Right, so what is, the number of trips for their break even? They add it, does it require an increase in the holiday period? And it's not a metric so much as it is, tracking the viability of the program, especially relative to Metro Access. And maybe Metro Access decides to do a publicity campaign, say, I actually want to use that instead. So, you know, we're talking about a program that is not complementary to this company. And I'm not hearing much about how we're ensuring that the viability of both programs are available, which kind of populations are interested in one over the other, whether that kind of work has been done. It is outside the scope, absolutely, of this, but it's something that I think might want to be thought about, especially when you talk about budget and making budget proposals, because if I was on the budget committee, those are the questions I would be meeting.
Okay. Questions? I don't know if you have any way, or Clint, if you have any, I don't recall any surveys. I know we worked with the Disability Advisory Committee and so forth, and the Transit Advisory Committee on these issues, and if there's been probably anecdotal evidence about STAR versus Metro Access and the right people, because it's a different.
Yeah, I
It's a different
understand.
service.
It's just like I said, when you come to the county with a budget,
Right.
I would immediately be putting them side by side and saying, what advantage or what perceived advantage is there? What is the break even? What kind of budget, does this budget can support a viable break even for this program versus the STAR program versus say Metro Access? And should we eliminate Metro Access? Is that just not a viable program? So those are just budget
So
questions. Those are not.
so- Yeah, no, Luann, I just want to let you know that we had those conversations. We've had those conversations over the last few years. We had them last year very intensely, and Tyler can speak to it. It is not something at the end of the day, Tyler can speak to it. I don't know if it came up in your audit. That may result in a lot of dollar savings if the service ends up moving from STAR to Metro Access, given the way we have to reimburse them. But your questions are completely valid because they are clearly, in some sense, and you might say in competition, but perhaps in parallel or overlapping, depending on your geometric view of what's going on. And if you look at the manager's proposed budget, there was a page and a half in there talking about options that we could look at in lieu of increasing taxes. This paratransit services was listed in that as one of the options. And I came to Wayne back in February, and this audit was done really because it needed to be done, but we're excited that he did this audit because it provided us some information and details we need to do that further analysis as we go into it for the next year. And I do want to say this because this is important. You weren't at the last meeting, John. I consider there's a virtual audit cycle. And the fact that my staff and DHS and now DES want to adopt Shirley and Wayne to work with for them means that I think it's a sign that we don't have enough staff to really do what we need to do to deliver the program correctly. I acknowledge that. That's not cutting on our staff because they do a phenomenal job. But those are you've raised exactly the right questions. So I appreciate that.
So
Well, does Tyler want to speak to the interaction between Metro Access?
I'll elaborate a little bit. We have looked at that. Part of the assumption on that break even is how many riders would convert to Metro Access if we eliminated that service. And just to make level set sort of knowledge, Zone 1, even if we to a Metro Access model, we would still have to provide service for Zone 1. That's a legal requirement. Zone 2 and 3 is what we could look at moving to Metro Access. And if all riders move to Metro Access, it would be more expensive potentially for the county. So it really.
why is that, Tyler?
It's just the amount that Metro per ride when you add in all the overhead. And Jason Cruz will be able to speak to this more than I can. But by the time it goes through the allocation model through the region, the amount per trip that we end up paying tends to be higher than our contract rates that we have with We Drive You. So if we can, part of the analysis is how many trips people in Zone 2 and 3 would actually move to Metro Access and how many people would find alternative transportation because maybe they don't prefer to use Metro Access. When we did some analysis at Zone 3, we used an assumption that 40% maybe would move over because they were medical related trips or, work related. And so they would have to move over. And that provided very modest savings to the county. So any that, you know, you may be looking at a cost increase. However, other benefits in terms of maybe cost avoidance, maybe we don't need to add FTEs to the transit bureau to better manage it, maybe more efficiency for the zone 1 customers. So there's a lot to consider.
And we don't know what such a policy or zone change cause in terms of behavioral change.
In
It was like
terms
you're
of what?
behavioral change.
Uh-huh.
If I was like, well, I always went to this dentist out the cloud and I went to this service provider out there. But I got there using Star and if Star's not available, then I'm gonna get a different dentist within the Star zone. Yeah, will it change people's behavior or not? So that there's a certain amount of modeling we can do, estimating, but ultimately it's gonna come down to people's personal behavior and choices about their life and where they're gonna go to do certain things and how they're gonna get there.
Before we get off of Luann's question, though, if you just accept that both are valuable and you're not looking at whether to coding for them or in one and not the other, you still have the performance metric issue to see whether or not the users actually find it valuable. And would you have more users if all these problems were addressed or less? You know, I'm not quite sure. I'm ignorant on one side because I don't know exactly what the qualifications are for Star. But I do have some knowledge because I used such services for 4 or 5 months where I had to have sidewalk access or street access to. And, you know, the buses are fabulous. You know, they make a lot of effort to move up to the sidewalk and they have the up downs. And I always found it relatively easy except for time, calculating the time it took to find private sector access. I mean, most taxis have some service where they have street access. So I just raised that question of performance metrics that you really raised. You know, what have you had surveys about users and how satisfied they are given the problems that you've outlined in the audit?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And again, I start to oversee this program in late 2022 and 2023. In 2022, actually, transit staff published a white paper through research of the nationwide practice of paratransit. And in that research white paper, it proposed to reduce the zone. The reason for reducing the service zone is because you gain efficiency and program performance out of that. When you have a long trip that goes all the way to Gainesville, the expectation of that vehicle gonna have a co-rider or come back on time with all the traffic in between is much lower than if it's actually. So in that sense, the efficiency, effectiveness, and satisfaction could all suffer because you are running. We are like a small horsepower car trying to climb a big hill. It's in that way. Can that climb? Yes, sometimes it does work, but you can't rely on the result. So we proposed that. That was actually part of the FY23 budget proposal. And when we did the research, we posted online and we sought feedback through the online sort of engagement format. We sought feedback. The feedback was actually, I would say in general, not against it. And based on that result, staff moved forward with further develop the concept. But at that time, so this is going to March of 2023-ish, we have a group of very strong sort of opinionated customers. I will say they're the customers that flatter us by insisting Star is better than Metro Access. There are also the tough love where they say, we want you to continue to serve the large area and also improve your service. With all those feedback coming in, we decided to not rush on the process, to halt that. One of the reasons to hold that change was because our contract is coming to end. We need to go out for a new RFP to procure a new contract in place.
When will that be, Wei? I thought it was been renewed.
It just happened.
It doesn't
It happened.
I'm talking about the
Right.
history of 2020.
I got it,
Yeah.
okay.
So we know it's gonna take about 6 to 9 months to go through the RFP. So we were hoping to make the decision of reducing service loan and then going to RFP. But apparently we did not have the sort of consensus on that. We decided to say, well, why don't we go out for RFP first? And while we're doing that, let's have engagement of what people want in the service. So we actually conducted open house. We provided material. You were commenting on, are people aware? Yes, they're very much aware. We provided information. We also give them a list of items like, which one is your priority? What are the services that you think is essential? What are the things that you think you can be, a compromise? I remember we had that at Central Library. We also had online forums for people to give feedback on that. Again, the general customer base seems to think Zone 3 service is not the one they want to keep the most. They would rather trade that for additional better service performance. But we still continue to hear from the group that, are really, like I said, the tough lovers that really love us and want to keep all the service at the same time. We did not have time to conclude that enough before the RFP has to start. So we went into the RFP with the mindset that let's make this part of that and make this as trip, paid by trip was part of that. So that in the future, if we have to reduce, we have a better way to calculate what's, what cost to give. So that's how the RFP, one of the criticized was, when you are doing the RFP, you didn't engage us. Actually, we don't engage for RFP purpose, but on this program, knowing how customer satisfaction is important, we did that extra step. So fast forwarding to the RFP, we were promised by the contractor with a lot of good things, including spare, which was part of the contract. I will say, when's audit come in at the best time? Because that's the beginning of the new contract. We start to realize they did not deliver some of the things that they said will be in the contract. We are trying to get at them to say, hey, when you said you're going to give us this, when are you going to give us? And the audit added a force to that. And we can say like, hey, you really need to deliver because otherwise the auditor is whipping his at us, right? So that all forces coming together, which is what, bring us to today. Many of the items that the audit found not there, it was part of the new contract, and now we are getting them. Not all of this, but piece by piece, it's coming together.
So do you all feel then now that you're getting the data and the information that you need to perhaps have a viable assessment of service area and whether you might want to tamper with the zones going forward?
I would just say for the service area, the metro per trip cost and our per trip cost is not a apple to apple comparison because the way they calculate that is through a formula that would distribute a lot of the, I will say, I'm using the word overhead, may not be the best word, but we'll distribute other costs on that per trip charge. It's like Greg is talking about how they have 30-some FTE. So some of those costs is loaded on that metro.
Sure, I get that. But I mean, I guess the bigger point here is that what you just recounted to me and Tyler was very helpful, to improve my understanding. And I think it's important for the public to understand that, you've looked at this and you made a reasoned, a rational judgment why you did or didn't do something. And I think that when the follow-up audit comes, I don't know why it needs to, why do you need so much time to not do it until fiscal 27?
Well, that's,
again? Or that's the,
so me scheduling it for Q1 of 2027 was to, when all of the corrective actions are implemented,
oh,
we
okay,
allow time so that when we're doing the work.
Q4 26th, and then you do your thing in
And
27,
it's fiscal 27. So that's
fiscal
about a
27,
year.
right, okay.
Right.
I got it.
So we,
He needs the data to have accrued in order to have something to audit.
But see, I think some of what you said would be helpful to put in the record for people to be able to look back on and say, okay, we had these discussions and this was what was decided at the time. And then you could make, going forward, you could determine, okay, do we want to revisit that or not? But another thing I just wanted to quickly bring up, and Greg, I very much appreciate your comments. I'm also mindful of the
Yeah, I
time.
think this may be our final, we're at 45 minutes on just audit and have several more exciting things to get to.
Right, so we may need a supplemental meeting about this, but looking at service, which, includes the 3 zones. I mean, it was also, a little, disconcerting to me, like on the no-show data and the consequences. So roughly 5% of all the calls result in no-shows. 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but it translates into a raw number of 500 out of 10,125 rides. This is on audit page 17. And it seems to me that, and the audit acknowledges that every no-show has a ripple negative effect on service that can be very disruptive for the people who are there when the driver shows up. And so the sanctions, page 22 discusses the scale of sanctions for no-shows such that Star customers are currently allowed 3 no-shows within a 30-day period, or 1 every 10 days. Now that strikes me as super generous. I mean, is this, who decides that scale? Because I think we have to ask the question, you talk about tough love way, is whether we say, okay, people, this is a service, everybody's paying for it. And sure, you may forget, or there may be slippage at some point, but 3 in 1 month is way generous in my view. And, maybe you need to do a pilot for a certain period of time and say, okay, 2 strikes in a month, you're out, rather than 3. I don't know. What's your thought?
So that's part of the existing rider guide. So with that, it has a scale like 3, you get a 7-day suspension, and so on and so forth.
So you're telling people the customer knows up front that they have 3 no-shows with impunity?
Yes, they do. And so what we do is after they get to their second no-show, the call center does a wellness check just to check in with the passenger to figure out what is causing them to have these no-shows, just to make sure there's not anything serious going on. So that's how we handle that no-show policy. And so on a monthly basis, we look at the metric of how many no-shows we have across the entire system compared to trip schedule. And so that averages about 2% based on this fiscal year.
Well, but then you say at page 17, neither the Transit Bureau nor TransDev have analyzed program level no-show data to identify trends or consider solutions to reduce the frequency. So this is like out there, and it doesn't seem like there's been any sort of corrective analysis as to how that can be reduced. And that would also improve service, obviously, or presumably.
And that was what Shirley and Wayne were telling us. We need to go to the next step. So we know what it is, but we need to go a little deeper all the way to the client level. Like if this is a subset, if this is 2 clients that are no-showing all the time, we need to dig deeper, do a little bit more analysis, figure out has it happened around the time of the month? If there's something more special, they wanted us to go to the next level of analysis.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess the last thing, I'm sorry. So this chart, Mark Schwartz, CMO, shows program operating budget expenses, 1.7 million in fiscal year 2021. Yeah,
Right.
where's your bifocals? Fiscal year 2025 budget, 3.7 million. So 1.7 million to 3.7 million in the span of 4 years.
What page are you on?
I'm on audit page 12. So, I mean, this sort of growth, I think, is probably a little unsustainable. And so I'm just wondering how the corrective action, which you've already made and pledged to make, how that's going to be manifested in your projections.
Mark Schwartz, CMO, will refer to Tyler Smith, DES for that.
That's, I look forward to your.
She can tell you right now.
No, the comparison between 24 and the actuals and the 25 budget, big jump you see is really because for the last few years, we've been significantly under budget. So the 25 budget actually did not increase compared to the 24 budget. We just are experiencing savings. We had 900,000 in savings in 24. That's coming down a little bit in 25. We'll be more around the 600,000 mark, I think. Part of the reason we didn't lower the budget in 25 was we anticipated this contract. We didn't know, even though ridership has been lower since COVID, which is part of the reason we've had savings. Then we were looking at, okay, but we have a contract recompete, our ridership is increasing, so let's be a little conservative. We did lower the budget a little bit in 24 because we have had savings since COVID. I think we're starting to see those savings erode a little bit as we see ridership increase, as we've had this contract recompete. I think now we also want to be a little conservative as we go into 27, knowing we may have some contract amendments, but we are tracking it closely, and we'll look at it very closely during 27 because I know that's going to be a tough year.
Okay, maybe in the next follow-up, then you could recount that, because that's very helpful and illuminating. So I appreciate that granularity. This is probably the most negative audit that I've experienced in 10 years being involved in this important initiative. And, I'm hopeful that you're going to be able to right the ship, and that the manager and the county board will provide the tools that you need to make sure that some of these, that all of these abuses and inefficiencies and so forth are substantially corrected. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll reclaim the floor for a moment here. This is not the results of an audit that anyone particularly wants to see, but at the same time, this is why auditing is really important, and it has revealed, as Clay mentioned also early on in a new contract, issues that we're now able to correct and do something about and get on to the right path. And I think that we really appreciate DES and all of your staff for being actively engaged and participating. We're really grateful to Wayne and Shirley, our audit team, for doing this. And I think, another thing I would just highlight is I think the organizational capacity growth we've seen both from the DHS and now DES audit, where deliverables that were not necessarily part of the audit, but the revenue analyzing tools and checklists and things like that we're developing through the audit process are going to benefit the program significantly as well. And so I think that is, as we continue to do this, I think we'll all get better. And this team here, even though they're part of the STAR audit, they work on a lot of other programs, and I'm sure have learned a lot of things that we will bring into other areas. And so we will continue, monitoring, and we will have our follow-up pre-scheduled, which is excellent. And we really appreciate all of the thoughtful time and questions here. A little bit of a different vibe from our last meeting, but very, very important. And we're grateful for that. I'm sure we can all follow up via email if there are additional outstanding questions. I think revised that we have quite a few of your questions already. So if you have additional from there, let us know. But I will pass it back to Wayne to continue our follow-up on it.
You don't have to stay.
Oh, yeah. And DES, thank you for being here. If you would like to stay, you're welcome.
Or you can just
Yeah.
We'll save it for next time.
Yeah.
Get no points first.
Feeling out of my life and the boundary that.
All right.
Wait, good to see you.
Okay, so the rest of the presentation on recently issued audit. Follow-up audits. So the first one is about the Community Center. This was a 2018 audit that focused on the overtime at the ECC, the need, why was the overtime needed, and what were some fixes. There were sort of three main thrusts of that report. And then about speeding up the training process to get people onto the line faster. Another one was about trying to reduce the volume that was going to the line by taking a look at ways to just clarify what the line is for. And then the last one was really answering the question about whether or not there was enough staff for the line. By the time that we got around to doing this, when I joined and got around to looking at this audit, there were 3 recommendations still open. One of them has to do with training, and the other 2 had to do with modifications to the training recommendation, audit finding 1.3 remains open at this time because the ACC is adopting a new training model that they'll be implementing later this year. So we're held off on doing follow-up on that until they've had a chance to. But if all the audit, the idea was to try to get people trained through the training program much more quickly so that they could be fully functional in all of the different specialties that they have to be able to respond to. And this new this international approach, international academies, emergency dispatch approach will do that. So we're optimistic that we're going to be able to implement it. The other 2 recommendations had to do very nuanced with the making a modification to the emergency line. There was a multi-part recommendation. Lots of parts had been already addressed, but the one part that remained outstanding had to do with changing the outgoing message on the emergency line to state what it was for. And because the folks they couldn't, the way that the line is built, they couldn't just make a change to the outgoing message. So they said that's not something they can do at this time. The recommendation stayed open. The second recommendation with respect to the line itself had to do with implementing recommendations from the emergency management information team that had existed at the time the audit was being done. So when we came in, lucky for the county and for ECC, a lot of changes have been made. They've moved over to an Amazon Connect model, which is an AI and chatbot model. So they are using artificial intelligence to help screen calls. And, as you think of any customer service line you call, please explain what's the reason for your call? And you say that, right, I have a problem with my bank account. And they go, okay, it sounds like you want this. That's the model that it's working on. They've done some analysis that revealed that a lot of the calls that come in are for disabling and reactivating fire alarms, which can go somewhere else. And a lot of them are, where's my vehicle? My vehicle got towed. What do I do? So a lot of those calls can also. So you call the line now, you tell them what you're looking for. And the model, Amazon Connect, funnel those calls away from true emergency personnel to a different service in the county. The audit report noted, they sent us some data that noted that they had about a 54% reduction in emergency calls from January monthly volume, January of 2024, after they system to December of 2020. So it's been really effective. And so even though they've got to significant call reduction, not the way that their audit recommended, because they got to the same goal, we've closed both of those recommendations. Any questions?
We'll move over to the nonprofit funding. So this was another audit, or it was I'm not sure if it was quite an audit, but there was like a review that was done, but right, it did happen, but there were two particular open recommendations that required follow. And keep in mind, the topics that were covered in an audit. One was about the county having an approach or having the county board as well as the DHS having kind of like how would we fund nonprofits and having some ultimate goals and objectives. So that was done and set up, and I believe that went into place somewhere in 2023. And so that addressed one of the recommendations. The other was about how do we go through and do some nonprofits back at, keep in mind, this is dated. That's not being reflective. But, I was not auditing the way it looks today. This audit was, let's just close out these recommendations so we can move on. But there was the recommendation around if there were nonprofits that were kind of using, I'm going to use the air quotes, so the sole source. So making sure, have a decision around those, and a decision was to keep that. And they provided evidence to show as to why they're going to keep it. This is a particular audit, John, that if you had questions on, and DHS is going to come back and join us in September to talk about the questions that you had relative to sole sourcing and procurements.
Great, thank you.
That we'll move on to the next topic of the draft audit plan for fiscal year 2026. So if I can just kind of want to just give a few kind of just over brief remarks about in development of this audit plan. So one of the things that I want to share with the committee is that when you see this is not to say that this is it. This is what the plan will look like. I know I failed in getting some of the input from each of you. It's not to say that that's going to be the approach going forward. So John, this is going forward. We want to take a look at how we develop these plans. Myself and Shirley, we're still trying to get ourselves up to speed. So this was we used a little bit of an expedited approach to get to this plan. We did have conversations with a number of folks. But as we go through the plan and talk about the plan, if you feel like something's missing, this is not, the plan is not here to say this is it. We'll have to take it to the board, the county board in July. So there's still wiggle room here to make adjustments if you feel like something, if you have a burning desire to see like, hey, we should take a look at something, tell us what it is and we'll get it added onto the document, and see what we can do here. But going forward, we'll get to you sooner, and we will make sure that we consider kind of what the committee is thinking as well. The other part around, we do want to get to a point where we're soliciting input from the community, but we need to understand what that means, because we definitely don't like, when we were going around even having conversations with the county staff, with the county board, we didn't approach this as like, okay, this is a witch hunt. Tell me what you want me to audit. We're not approaching it that way. We don't want it to be that. So I just want we do reach out to the community. We want to make sure that we're approaching it in a meaningful and thoughtful way to get value-added feedback that's going to help drive the plan, ultimately to drive a good work plan that will be beneficial to the communities. Now, our county board, they hear from our residents quite often, and you're attending a lot of the meetings. As we met with not only the county manager's office, but when we met with our county board members, we had two questions relative to, they were supply questions in advance. And those questions, two of the questions dealt, what are you hearing from the residents? What are the residents thinking about? What's on their mind? What are some of the topics? So that did come up. So it's indirectly getting some of the feedback that from the kind of hearing what's on the minds of residents. So that was in some way baked into this. Also, just keep in mind that this office is really under transformation from the time that we came on to where we are today. Bringing Shirley on was a great value add to to the function and bringing and hearing her experiences and hearing, her what she's seen around the county and being a resident here, but also just from her experience in the federal government space, it's been very helpful. So a lot more to come on that. So if you could go to the next slide, I'll just kind of, and so, I mean, the background, this is just a little bit about the, just kind of developing the plan in itself, and roll to the next slide because I know on time. Being mindful of time, but the development strategy, again, I mean, this was kind of us moving quickly. I mean, trying to get to, a proposed or a draft plan and having conversations, and we had good conversations around the functions that we have just that I talked about a few minutes ago. But the plan is really built around 3 particular areas, similar to what the most recent plan is. But I don't want to undersell this. Yeah, we see the performance audits, we'll have those, and conducting the follow-up audits, I'll talk about that later. But we also, the infrastructure, we have a lot of work to do, because one of the things that we have to get ready for is a peer review. And that peer review is going to be huge for us. We need the first peer review. So when we're bringing in someone in to audit the auditors, which is always fun, I've been through those before. We're subject to audits too, so we get to live the pain. But that is going to be a huge thing for us to continue updating our policies and procedures and job aids and having templates. And what this is really doing is building a sustainable function, so that when we hit the lottery, the mega millions, and we're saying we're going to part ways, when the next person comes in, they can do a seamless pickup and we'll keep rolling. So that's what we're really pushing to build here. So, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the things on there, but I know we want to talk about the audit. So why don't we get into the various audits that are listed here. The first one is a procurement process. So this is an audit of looking around the counties, looking across the county, because it's very decentralized, but looking at the various departments, procurement and contract management practices for compliance with the overall county purchasing guidelines, as well as the Virginia Public Procurement Act. So taking a look at how the various departments across the county are making sure are meeting the objectives that goods and services are procured at a fair and competitive price and consistent with what we're looking for. So are we getting the quality for the quality expectations, are we getting to that? And I know that there's been other audits done in the past, some by one by the Office of County Auditor prior to me, but I know Maria's team, internal audit, spends a lot of time on contract management and on contract management. So we really want to, kind of get into, again, what are those practices that are being followed, contract management practices being followed. So that is the procurement audit. The IT architecture governance piece, what this is really taking a look at is looking at our strategy for how do we go about assessing the existing inventory of the technology products and services that we have across the county, and how do we identify, how do we go through, what is that governance process, making sure that when we're acquiring or we're getting technology that it's not in conflict with another department, or we already have something, so we're not duplicating services, or we're not duplicating technology that exists somewhere else, so we don't have this redundancy with our providers, whether it's an in-house hosted system or a cloud provider. So making sure that we're on the right side of the equation there. The other part is when it's time to decommission or underutilize or assets that are underutilized, how do we go about that as well? So making sure that we're really having a consistent approach and cost-effective approach to acquisition and decommissioning technology, but really looking at that architecture governance process across the county. The other 3 audits that are here is one around recruiting from our HR department, taking a look at what is our process for bringing talent on. How do we go about making sure that as we going through the recruiting process, that we're moving through from a timeliness standpoint, and making sure that we're not having positions, that we have the mechanisms in place, making sure that the recruiting process is achieving or meeting established service level agreements. And that does it allow that flexibility for hiring managers? So to the extent that they're, when they're attempting to hire, that we're following law, we're following policies and procedures, but we have some flexibility to better manage that particular process. Flood resiliency and plan recommendations. This is getting to as a result of in response to the flood from 2019, there were a number of recommendations that came out of that. So taking a look at those recommendations to see how we're doing and implementing, so that if we have another big storm again, that we are in a better position. So are we effectively implementing those recommendations?
400 years from now,
What's that?
400 years.
And lastly, public safety overtime. I know this is a topic.
That we're gonna wait for the team.
Sorry. You want to share with the class?
No. We're talking about the public safety overtime.
Yeah, public safety overtime. What are some questions?
Okay, I'm paying attention.
Okay, so public safety overtime. So I know this has been a topic that has been done and overdone, but this particular, when you look at the, kind of looking at emergency communications, fire and police, this is really this audit will be different than what has been done in the past. What the audits, at least done out of the Office of County Auditor, has been in the past, it's been more focused on staffing models and when there's billing of overtime for, like a Marine Corps marathon or something that DPR has in place. Some of that got into those audits. This audit is more about taking a look at the collective bargaining agreements, which will be going into next year, looking a little closer to those collective bargaining agreements and seeing, are they making sure that those bargaining agreements provide for an equitable and efficient, practices for awarding. So it's really, when we take a look at this particular audit, this is getting to like, what is the cause? Maybe is it a particular cause of to why overtime is so high? Yeah, we understand that some groups are understaffed, but when it's time to award overtime, you want to make sure that we're not and consistently following the practice that we're awarding someone overtime, then they should not have been awarded the overtime, but also making sure that there are provisions for that the agreements are free of ways that you could manipulate or exploit to get overtime. I've done collective bargaining agreements in the past and prior lives, and there was the opportunities of where someone could exploit a particular group and abuse it. So could that be something that is causing why is this a cause? So why overtime is going on? So right now the focus.
We don't want any headlines about 500,000 a year fire captains, right? I mean, and there have been a few akin to that.
They may be.
You have a number that's far too low. I'm serious.
I'll just make one comment to follow up on that. You're talking about exploiting overtime by looking at the individual. But having dealt with the customs service.
Well, we want to start by looking at understanding their agreement and what their agreement says, and that someone is not saying, hey, now I know collusion is a little bit harder to work, but if you have people that are saying, hey, I'm going to call out sick, so you're next on the list.
Well, I'm just saying, to add to your thinking, having had some experience with the customs service on this, it was as much a management participation in this effort to exploit overtime than it was individuals.
And I know the internal audit team is looking at county-wide overtime policies and procedures, and through pre-approvals they're looking at.
Is there, are there state or national kind of best practice metrics? You know, sometimes in the other audits there, you're comparing it to kind of more accepted standards, accepted practice standards. Is there that kind of thing in the overtime universe?
I mean, it's like, I mean, we can look at that, see if that's there.
But there's nothing that comes to mind.
I mean, nothing, I mean, we haven't gotten it. So, something.
You haven't done the public safety.
What's that?
You haven't done the public safety time overtime.
Well, predecessors have taken
Yeah, right.
this on.
And we are actually doing an overtime fund right now.
The internal.
So I have a question about participation by union representatives, because typically for something like this, where you are actually talking about the bargaining agreement, they will demand participation, possibly even on a daily basis, and oversight of the data you collect, and probably oversight of the preliminary results. It's very, I mean, I'm only going by what the federal unions do, but you basically can't do anything without representation available, and be very transparent with unions. It's a very, compensation is an extremely touchy topic. So we don't want to give the impression we're essentially auditing the agreement with the idea that we're going to find, problems with the agreement itself, as opposed to, possible issues with implementation. So I would just be very cautious if you haven't done yet. To be very inclusive, err on the side of inclusive and transparency.
But there could be an issue with the agreement itself, right?
We're
But-
not,
but-
but we don't,
but
we
you're
are
saying
not
that-
labor union specialists, and I'm
That's-
not sure that that's the type of audit we want to even talk about. That is that's labor. That's not, I mean, I don't know that we have the qualifications to do that.
Is this going into like how do we operationalize that agreement into practice?
Right,
So
but I want to make sure we keep it on that and be very clear
Right.
and very transparent with the union that is exactly what's happening, not we're going to pick apart your agreement and we're going
Right.
to make recommendations on how to renegotiate that agreement. That is the furthest thing you want to try to get into, or even give the impression to get.
Well, I guess the only thing I could think of is that, but I mean, maybe that would be appropriate at some point in some context. I mean, just because you have an agreement doesn't necessarily mean it is sacrosanct forever.
But
And
this is not the forum for doing that.
no, it may not be the form,
So
but
I'm
I,
saying, we just want to make a clear delineation, because you do not want to get into, lawsuits, sick outs, any of the other kind of stuff that I've seen happen. Union action, back before times, but
I think it's a very valid concern to point out. And I think, as Wayne started off with, right, like this is still a draft audit.
and that's
plan,
why I'm
and-
mentioning it.
Yeah, and I
Now,
think, right, this is the right time to provide this feedback, because it gives us time to consult with our labor relations folks and get the input that we would need to make a confident decision that this is something that we want to pursue, or this is the way that we want to pursue it. So I really appreciate,
Yep.
I think this is feedback. I know I've seen Wayne taking notes, so we'll take that back and we will definitely be sure to look at it.
and there's another thing to be aware of with unions, typically with union practices, if there's a precedent that's been established, it's not part of the official bargaining agreement, but they typically win in court. I mean, we had a case in the Forest Service, somebody, there was a very remote area, and the station chief was like, you know what, let me bring water, because they didn't have, for some reason, operating water. It was too rural or something. So he did it for years. Then he retired. And then the next staff director who came on, they said, oh, you have to bring us water. And he said, no, I don't. And they said, yes, you do. And they won in court because precedent had been established. And so labor law is very different, and you have to be, you do want to make sure you consult with not just labor specialists, but like, as you said, labor relations, employee relations, union representatives. We'll all need to be at that initial meeting to provide you with, feedback, boundaries, and so that you can be very clear with them, so they can be very clear with their membership.
what's happening, not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
I guessed, and I
Well,
don't know what the
I
rules
was
are.
gonna say, I
guess.
think we're currently done for member questions.
I just have one item.
I have a question, but I
We'll
certainly
come
don't
to
want to hog the
Yeah.
floor from Jackie's telling of all people.
And the parking lot.
Or Nick Jacoby, the new president of the Civic Federation. So I will make this very quick. So thank you. I'm just wondering in your public safety overtime explanation was helpful. I'm curious on the enterprise, the IT enterprise architecture governance. Is there any opportunity here for synergies or economies of scale with APS and with the constitutional offices? I mean, sometimes we have that tunnel vision and and everybody loves to be able to say that we all collaborate with each other, but at the same time, we all have our own systems. And there's reasons for that because we're chartered differently and organized differently. But again, are there opportunities to break down barriers in the IT realm that we're not at the?
I kind of had a similar question, not necessarily to combine the audits, but schools also have a relatively new auditor and you guys have been building relationships. Like this might not be the one, but might it make sense to do concurrent audits in similar fashions? So then at the end, we could also say, oh, this finding and that finding actually might a little bit of a finessing, and the same with the constitutionals, but APS, I think on this and on procurement could be places longer term, but it would have to be sort of a voluntary collaboration.
Have you had a chance to meet your school's counterpart yet?
Yeah,
Great.
very much.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We all paid our own.
So my last question, and maybe I can't read Jackie's mind, but sometimes I can. So this helpful roadmap, can you dish on the community benefits audit?
So the audit is underway. We announced the audit back in April. So as we're finishing up and working with STAR, we announced this one. The audit continues. It is delayed because it's the number of things that are going on. We've had some meetings with CPHD, understanding their process. We met with DES. I didn't realize that Way is going to be the person that we're going to chat with there. And I was like, well, you're going to be on our frequent audit. You're going to get gold status after the community benefits audit. So, but yeah, so far what we've done is had lots of meetings to understand the process. And we've gone through some projects and started developing like our testing matrices, how do we want to look at site plans, kind of how are we looking at community benefits? We're still talking this through. We're still going through this, so it's too premature to start talking about observations or what we're seeing right now. It wouldn't be fair to Mark to start talking about kind of what we're seeing when we have not even talked to some of the folks. I mean, we're still building up kind of in this audit area. We did get 2 meetings set with planning commission staff, individuals on the planning commission. So we're going to meet with commissioners. So we're going to meet with them. We're meeting with one tomorrow. Is that 10 months? And then got another individual. So
Great.
Solicit their input. So we're well into it, but it's too early to start discussing observations.
Well, no, but I'm glad that this is helpful. I mean, and I'm glad to know that you're still doing your outreach because if there's any audit of anything we've discussed today, it's really community benefits that is the most grassroots driven. And that's where this came from.
Yes.
Whether it's the Civic Federation, the Park and Recreation Commission, the Urban Forestry Commission, the Planning Commission. I mean, there's a whole raft of groups who are really going to be super interested, and I'm sure will be willing to offer you up prime examples of where things have gone awry.
And
I would just jump in and add that like, we've been trying to coordinate a little bit across circumstances, across initiatives, across leadership changes to make sure that this may not be the only community benefit audit ever. We may end up having to chop it because it is so large, but that the work that Wayne and Shirley are doing and the brains they're bringing are helping us on the boards and the managers' efforts to explain the site plan process better, to engage the community and understanding it and pushing on it. And you'll see, if you look back over the last year, really, but especially the last couple of months, you see some breadcrumbs there. Like we gave Samia a year to get her feet under her, but we've been driving, whether it's in Hotel Pentagon or it's in some of the, when Roslyn is coming up in July, kind of trying to say like, we have to get better at how we communicate that. We're not there yet. But the audit is helping with another lens of how to communicate it. And I think CivFed's work and anybody who's been in a site plan and, shows up in the room and tries to make sense of it, like we have a little work to do to explain what is a complicated process and to do so more effectively. So I think it'll be a little bit iterative. And for that reason, Wayne gets so many emails from me because every one of the emails that pertain to any of those topics I send as context, and we want to give enough time to bake on that and have something meaningful come out, even if it's not the only meaningful thing that's needed in the work.
And those emails have been very helpful for us to help us shape the audit and see different things. Because we're tracking kind of what are the themes, what are the comments. So that is coming in to help shape the audit.
Jackie, were you going to say something?
Yeah, if it's.
If you read your mind.
Yeah, that was one of the top things on the list, absolutely, maybe the top. I wanted to know first how the best way is for us to provide, Civic Federation, to provide input into the scoping. As you're meeting with everyone else, I would request that we schedule a meeting with the Civic Federation where we can bring together some of we would probably include some of the people who have been the sources of some of the emails that Susan has been referring to on One Roslyn. There's some also, we did have a section in the resolution that we just adopted. It does call for some specific things. And you have that resolution, yes?
I will tell you that I can't.
It was down, but it's back up again. It was,
First thing they took down.
we believe that our host had a malware. But they're not giving us information. It was down for 3 or.
Just have to hit it right then.
But basically, the main thing is data. It's similar to what you were talking about on some of these other things. It's what data is collected, in what form it's collected, how it is documented, and how it is tracked, and its transparency at some point. Also, guidelines and standards that since these are negotiated behind closed doors, the question really is, what are the standards and operating procedures for the staff who are basically negotiating billions of dollars without anyone ever being able to see how the basis of the cost benefit basis that they believe they're operating. So it's basically cost benefit, and we have no idea, no ability to track it. It's just a black box. And so
Search style.
we'd like to give you some examples of where it's relevant, but that's most of it. And I do think that also, moving to your other list, the top of your other list, yes, procurements and contracts has been on my list for quite a while, so I'm very pleased to see that show up. But the IT architecture, I would strongly recommend that you meet with the IT Advisory Commission, of which I am a member. Because this has been a topic that we have discussed for many years.
And that's still in business, right? That hasn't been dissolved yet.
No, ITAC.
It's
is
a
very
yeah.
active.
Close, please.
Yeah.
Troublemakers go.
We met at George Mason Hughes this week. And
I just
we have
appointed
made
a new
several.
member for you all as well.
Pardon me?
I just appointed a new member for you all as well.
We have
so-
2 vacancies. We
Yes,
had
one is,
2 recommendations.
yes, one is full as of the June meeting, the other, we didn't get an interview in beforehand, so.
Okay, right, and we also have a student member coming. So it's a very robust.
You want to
Yeah.
retract your comment?
I
We
couldn't
have some
help it.
defensive people over here.
It's a very.
You were expecting it.
So I would ask that you
Yep.
meet very soon in your scoping phase with the IT advisory commission. And also you will find recommendations on this in the recommendations that commission has given annually on our priorities that we have given to the board. Because the issue of what is at the enterprise level, which is almost nothing. Really, it's mostly DTS is very tiny, and mostly at the department level, which is why for the first step, I would recommend the idea of trying to include APS or the others, because we don't know what is happening across departments, let alone outside. So to get a good sense of that, I think is really critical. And we have been asking for, matter of fact, for the comp plan, one of our recommendations is that a digital strategy be part of the comprehensive plan, since it goes through pretty much everything. So this is a really very important topic. And I think, from having worked in lots of different areas over time, you may find that the same things that you found in the STAR audit play many other programs. And it is not the goodwill or the dedication of the staff. It is that we have very old systems, and many departments, they don't have department level expertise for how to improve those. And our departments, more and more, it's essential for data to be able to be accessed systematically across the enterprise, and we don't have the interconnectivity. That would be huge. Now, they are using AI to try to kind of jump over some of that, and that was one of the questions we had when we had our AI. I think the mission is the main thing. On flood resiliency, we have a flood, the Civic Federation has a flood resiliency committee, and we have been working with BES and their leadership on this, meeting, I think, monthly for 3 or 4 years. So we have, and we have teams that manage with civic associations, each of the watersheds that are among the 5 critical watersheds. So I'm the lead for the Spout Run watershed, 9 civic associations. So you have tremendous expertise at a civic level there. And I confess, I brought some of my expertise from you. Although I always told them everything worthwhile I learned here. But, on public safety, overtime, and on the recruitment, I think you will find that we have very different strategies between police and fire. And that understanding the differences of those strategies and why they have taken different directions will be very informative. And on that, I would recommend that you come to, that you ask, if you ask Andy if he would be willing to have you come to his advisory. He has a chief's advisory committee, which I am also. And we have a subcommittee that is actually looking at, has been looking at recruitment. And we've had many briefings on overtime and how they manage overtime, which is primarily in order to be able to maintain the core services when they're so understaffed. But their strategy, I would say, is radically different the way the fire department does it, and with different results. They also are, went back on your HR recruiting. The recruiting, a lot of it in public safety and responders, is done through those two departments, fire and police, not through HR. So understanding, yeah, like your enterprise for IT, understanding what's done at the department level, what versus what's done at HR will be very important. And again, significant differences in the strategy and frankly, the outcomes for police and fire in how effective their strategies are. So those are some thoughts on those. And also simply the recommendation that the community in the form of civic federation and the community in the form of some of the commissions, but also committees like the Chiefs Committee are important resources of people outside the system who have been focused on these exact issues for 5, 10 years. Appreciate this. I think this is a great list. It's a great.
For the feedback.
With your indulgence, so I think it's important to level set on community benefits because it is a very complex topic, technically very complex. And it is also a long process. And so right now, where we have scoped to this audit is to take from the point of departure or this goes to communicating, being transparent about what, not raising expectations and then dashing them to pieces, right? If we want to put that audit out anytime near that red diamond, we have to keep the scope managed. Right? So this is why Susie keeps talking about, this is not going to be the only bite of the apple. So I don't want to let anybody think we're going to take on the entire process this one time.
That's why I said we want involvement in scoping, is because we understand this. We're also working with the manager and the board on the comprehensive plan, on the GLUP, on the site plan process, all those other things. And yes, they all have a little touch on that a little bit. But that's why my recommendation is focus on data systems, documentation, transparency, even transparency to the board.
So the scope, I believe, was set in the draft or the approved audit plan that we did September or October, I think September. And the scope at that time, my understanding the scope remains really compliance to approved community benefit packages. So once a site plan has been acted upon by the board, there is a set of site plan conditions, and there is, all the elaboration within the board report that we receive about what it is we are supposed to receive as condition for the development. What the scope of this is to say, did we actually receive those things, and how do we know?
Correct. And how do we make sure we have the mechanism?
That goes.
And that's a lot. I mean, that's plenty.
Let's let Wayne.
So, but the disembarkation point of that is
you know, even so, once we get it, how do we make sure that it stays? That all of a sudden it doesn't disappear, you know? So then there are some things, you write a check, clear the bank, we're done. But if there's something like, if there's an open space or there's something that they committed to building a park and then all of a sudden that park disappears.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that there's a release?
Absolutely.
But throughout, as Shirley said, throughout the profession, we're like, that's another audit, that's another. audit.
Yeah.
Yes, I
It's just
understand.
setting
We could have a
expectations.
community
Yeah.
benefits auditor on staff that would just do nothing but.
So I have
Focus
not
on my-
seen,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I've searched all the documents. I have not seen the scoping, and I thought you were still working on scoping because last meeting I asked to participate in the scoping, and I understand you're saying we missed some of these things, but if there is a written document on scoping, I haven't found it,
So,
and I want to read that. But I'm talking even before you do that. In the, one of the things I believe Susan probably forwarded to you from Aaron on the current Roslyn project that's coming up in July. And I'm paraphrasing, basically what he's saying is he had back and forth, good faith conversations with staff, and it's Aaron Schreiber that he was talking about. And that he was told that they didn't have a document that would say what the specific dollar value of the agreements were. And not a standard for the method that would be used for updating that. They had a sort of guidance that it should be less than what it was for various reasons, but it's not a standard you could follow.
Right.
So the existence of the original data in dollar format, which is different than, is there a park? Did they do a affordable housing unit? It's really dollar value of section that is actually identified as community benefits and how that is arrived at, you know, how it is documented. And then particularly since we're having so many that are coming back, you know, with extensions and extensions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, and you're gonna pull it up.
Oh, yeah. So the approved audit committee work plan includes objectives for each audit, which describes not in extensive detail, but it shapes the
This is
scope.
last year's approved?
This is, we approved it in October 22, 2024, after Wayne had come on, and it is posted on the primary county auditor website
Okay,
page.
so
So
I asked for the scoping at the last meeting. I think it's in your minutes.
Okay.
And I said, we want to participate in the scoping.
okay.
And nobody said we already did it
Well, I guess
Right, I mean, we're.
because it was delayed.
So, I'm right, that audit was, you know, we wanted to get to it sooner, but then CPHD asked if we could push it back some because there was some staffing things going on there. coming up.
Yes,
So
yes. I
So we
understand.
pushed it back, but what you're describing, the objective, the audit objective was, you know, kind of, again, looking at making sure once the board assigns and approves, do we have the mechanisms in place? So we're talking just at that point, do we have the mechanisms in place to ensure? But going how we got to those, what I'm hearing you discuss is how we got to
Well, even what they are in a dollar value.
what we're seeing in the audit are the site plan conditions, community benefits, where the amounts were approved by. So we're already looking at what was, so there was a site plan condition that we would contribute this much to housing, affordable housing, or this many units. We're taking that as the gospel and following that through to like implementation. And then
Yeah, I think
I think the other audit would be how do we identify with the county needs, or how did we get to that point? Like that would be an audit in itself. We would never
I
get
think
this.
there's something else there. Some of these are what the dollar value was that was assigned to whatever the benefit was, not just, that is not in what the board adopts. the papers don't have that.
And we have to make sure, the one thing that we've learned too, we have to make sure we're talking about what has been defined as a certificate. Like we have, and I think that is something that, you know, when something has been, it's not just that you get, you know, you look at the zoning ordinance of 1559, you know, there's specific, this is what, these are community benefits.
Well, it actually says including but not limited to.
Jackie,
That's what we're.
Does say not limited to, so that's not a.
Yeah, and
But
again, I think we're trying to kind of, it's gonna be imperfect, first of all,
Yeah,
but
no,
we're trying to tease it apart. I think by starting at board approval and going forward, there's gonna be all kinds of discoveries of data systems that don't work and that you wouldn't
And-
have
I
a
believe
voice
that's
against.
correct.
So that's the
Yeah.
first pass. At the same time, luckily, we've got all these extended site plans all coming together at the same time. And so Mark and the board and the leadership of HD are having those lively conversations with Aaron and with others about, okay, how do we explain this? You know, and it's actually really interesting because I couldn't have explained some of these things. And I tried, I warned Mark that I tried last night with the Park and Recreation Commission. I probably got 80% right, but you know, we'll iterate from there.
Pretty good.
So you know, I think the good news is like, we've got all the brains on it. It's not gonna be perfect quickly, but I think having those iterative and sort of in parallel is really gonna be helpful. And I think actually One Roslyn, we started in June and tried to kind of put some of the breadcrumbs down, but our July meeting, the eternal. And during that eternal time we spent together.
I mean, good grief, if we can have a half a dozen public safety audits, we can have a half a dozen community benefits.
Exactly. Exactly.
But all kidding aside, I really think, Jackie, that what the auditor is talking about and the product of this audit will be very helpful in serving as a foundation for some of the inquiries that you and many others, including myself, would like to see. I think this will be a good predicate for that.
Well, and I also think some of those documents are really good in helping, like have been very helpful in getting the team up to speed so they can even find their way through the forest, right? It's not an easy
And I
task.
think to your point about this kind of being a foundational situation, you know, our county auditors are subject matter experts in a number of topics. Community benefits and planning is perhaps not
Yeah,
one
that's
of
the
them.
first one.
And so some of this is also building their capacity to even have the real knowledge to flag things and to be like, okay, well, where's the legal boundary here? Where is the, you know, to what extent does direct nexus come into play? To what extent does dollar value versus, you know, it's a planned amenity and so therefore it doesn't really matter what the dollar value is, and like building that muscle for the folks that are going to need to understand all of that to get into the deeper conversations is a very, I think, critical part of laying the foundations.
Bottom line, I'd like a better way to communicate to civic associations who are that you are paying attention to this, that there is an audit, that it is going forward, which is hard to tell, you know, by these various documents, and that the scope that they have received, you know, so I'd like to be able to say they are, your documents are part of what they have seen. So that we know that it's a first step. And what we're trying to do is reestablish a sense of trust here. And you could be very helpful, you will be very helpful.
Yeah, and you know, we want to be respectful, I mean, one of the audit process as well.
Right.
Because if we start sharing observations, oh, this is what we
We
found.
don't
so
want
far.
the
You
observation.
don't want that.
No.
It's half baked, and
No, we
you know,
don't.
so as we're building this out and we're auditing this, if we put something, so like, when it comes to the in-flight audit and the products that we're, the matrices and testing things it's trying to do, if you were to see that right now, you just like, what does? You know, it's because we have gone back and be like, okay, what you tried that, that's not. Because we work in the black and white world, we wanted everything black and white. So to be able to share, you know, kind of what a document looks like in an audit that we're that we're developing for testing would be an unprecedented thing for any auditor to start sharing before the work.
I'm not asking.
And I would say.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn because my wife is going to kill me. I'm just putting that out there.
It is 6:48 now, which I think makes.
You've blown through the deadlines.
Among our longest audit committees, and we do have
With all
at
due
least,
respect.
at least
We still
one
have a
more
quorum
item.
after you leave.
You guys can talk about this all night. I know that Nick has to go fight this across the hall at 7 o'clock.
If we can talk in another forum, that would be
Yes, I'm sure.
And I think just to summarize and ask, I'm hearing is aside from the paragraph saying we're gonna get to next year, when is the interim step when a public one pager or more detail might be available to the community in the process? So not to answer today, but to think about.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
just what you're studying, not
Yeah.
Yeah.
what you're finding.
And in some cases of the more complicated at first time, think something at the beginning and then we're working
It's
to pound it out. So where that pops out is up to discussion, but I think that's the end.
That would be.
So that's the bottom four. That's our.
Yeah.
Modernization of policy.
Communist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are building the plane and flying.
Yes.
Ably.
Don't scare me.
We've come a long
Yeah,
way in just the 8 or so months that we've had Wayne on board and less than that we've had Shirley. And I guess important to always put in context, think about the amount that we have accomplished with 2 fully completed audits, all of the follow-up audits either completed or in process, a level of productivity that when you look at the past county auditors of recent could not have been said for them. And yes, and so,
Observe.
it is really big. And I think taking suggestions
Super
like that in as we go is really important, but also like caveating that with just the reality check of like how much in such a short time has been pulled together and not having work aids or matrices just from day one. Like all of that had to be created fresh. And we've gotten 2 audits done and we've gotten, and so we're doing a lot. And I think, it doesn't mean we can't do more, but just, let's all keep in mind kind of the context that this is happening within. And I'm very proud of the team and the work plan. And I think we've done a good job.
I completely agree. The only thing I would say is that, the community benefits audit is of paramount importance to the community.
Oh.
So many people
You can see.
and to,
You saying it would be a benefit to the community?
Oh, no. Moving on.
Yes.
Moving on. We've reached that
And
time
Mark's
that you
ruined it with, no. All right. Was there more?
Keep on. There's just 2 things I want to.
charge, right?
Yeah, I wanted, so the county board charge, so that is we should do an annual review of that every year. So what I'm gonna do is we'll send an email to the whole audit committee. The ask is to take a look at that and see if there's any changes that need to be made. We are doing a deeper dive into that. I mean, how does it look for government auditing standards? One of the things we're actually thinking about is to split that document into 2. So the audit committee has its charge and then the Office of County Auditor has its charge. Because right now it gets a little, like when we look at it, it's hard to distinguish, well, what is the auditor doing versus the audit committee? So we may have to separate that out. That is kind of on the table, but you'll get an email with the board charge. And asking to look at it, if you could get it back to us by July 31st, that would be great. And then because we want to get ready to bring it to the committee for review in September and then on to.
I will say, Wayne, I think like the, kind of the organization and presentation for the STAR audit was stellar.
Thanks.
The About Us page and the acronym of AuC, ACA. How do we?
AuCA.
AuCA, yeah.
Office of County Auditor.
AuCA, and all of that, the table of contents, the captioning, the font, everything. Very
All
nice.
right, moving on.
Very nice.
That was a mistake.
That was.
We're right on
So
cue.
we're good. More about
Membership and recruiting is on the list, so to have in the mind. Who, and particularly amongst the federal network, are there folks who need to be participating in the next version? Great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's like some IGs and some GAO folks
Oh,
who,
on the cooks in this kitchen.
yeah, who really prove and I think find meaning and really support the ideas.
But also, you know, with some of the main topics we're seeing recurring, right, subject matter
Yeah.
experts where we don't have planners, we
Yeah.
don't necessarily have public safety employees who can say, well, this is what I've lived through and experienced, that can really be helpful, I think, to understanding everything. So things to consider. But other than that, our next audit committee meeting is on September 25th at 4:30 p.m. We will obviously be in touch between now and then. And you all know where to find us. If you have any additional follow-up questions, I think there might be some. We will be available and happy to talk through and figure out how best to get you those answers. So we really appreciate everyone's time. This is a hefty meeting, but I think important and useful and good. So thank you all for being here. And if there is no further discussion, I'd like to move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All right, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you very much.